Welcome to Maker Ranch. Today we're talking how to learn how to make things. A lot of my content has been step-by-step tutorials or just demonstration videos of me making interesting things. But there's a lot to learning how to actually do something that can't really be covered in just a step-by-step process. Now, I've been thinking about this because I'm about to host some workshops at the Reset Hotel. So I'll be hosting workshops August 4th through the 10th, and they're free for anyone staying at the hotel for a minimum of 2 nights. Now, if you want to stay longer, that's great. And in these workshops, I'm going to teach entry-level projects on wood, stone, and concrete. I'll be teaching the same workshops every single day, start with a quick demo, and then let you get hands-on. So in preparing these workshops, I started really thinking, how do I learn things? And I'm not really a step-by-step tutorial kind of guy. So today we're talking about 3 aspects of learning that I think are really important when you're trying to take information that you know a little bit about, but translate that into physical skill so you can build stuff. So as a former academic, I learned a long time ago, there's a big difference between telling someone something and teaching someone something. So the 3 aspects that I'm interested in learning are feel, motivation, and escalation. And these are how I kind of think about it in my own career as I sort of progress my skills without necessarily having a clear step-by-step plan or instructions. So feel is a concept that I think is the most difficult part to translate from information to your hands or to your body for fabrication or any kind of activity. And I compare it to surfing. You can watch videos on how to surf all day long, but until you really get the feel of what the board's doing, what the waves are doing, of what it feels like to get tumbled up and lose your breath because you're losing all sense of direction, that's a real hard set of, and it is information, but to translate through the typical methods of information that we have access to, video, written word, etc. So making things on the potter's wheel in ceramics is another great example of this. You can see someone go, oh, you put your hands around the clay while it spins and then you just shape it. But to understand the pressure that your fingers need to have, or the resistance to centering the clay, or to feel like when the whole structure is about to collapse or get really wobbly, that's information that's really hard to abstract into your extremities. In my projects, the freehand power carving I do with the angle grinder is most similar to these kind of feel things. You have to kind of get used to what the tool feels like in your hand, how the rotation of the blade creates sort of a gyroscopic force, how hard to push, when you push too hard or create sort of divots that are too deep, how that's going to create sort of complications for your orbital sander later. Those are really hard things to break into step 1, step 2, step 3. It's really, a lot of these projects with the free carving are really just a couple steps. Glue up the pieces, carve them down, sand them, and finish them. But within that step of carving, there's really a whole bunch of little improvisational steps. You do this, but then you get a split where the whole chunk of wood splits out. Or you hit a knot, how do you carve the knot versus other parts of the grain? All those things are more little reactionary moves that you have to learn as you experience them. And that's why I'm really excited about hands-on workshops, is because you can kind of let people feel it and then coach them to explain to them why they're feeling that and what the counter move or the counter strategy is to overcome that. And that's why I'm so excited about workshops, because you just can't always get that feel aspect across through a YouTube video. And even though power tools should simplify the process of fabrication or make it easier compared to hand tools, they still require feel. You can't push too hard or you're going to slow down the tool or burn the wood. You can't go too soft or you're never going to make any progress. So I'm really excited about hands-on instruction where you can get past just the step-by-step information and go a little bit deeper into feel. The second aspect of learning that I think is really interesting is motivation. Motivation to me is what makes information sticky. If I don't have motivation, someone can tell me something, but if I don't have an intrinsic desire to understand it, I often don't. My memory is not that great just on its own merits. But when I have motivation, it's really strong. Now, how does motivation relate to DIY projects, woodworking, fabrication, design, and making things? Well, I like to separate it out into two categories, and this is how it works for me. I have two main different types of motivation that keeps me involved with learning how to do new skills. One of those aspects is taste. Taste means I have like a specific aesthetic interest in the outcome of the project. It means that I have like either kind of a critical reaction to what I typically see for a dining table, and I want to make one that meets the stylistic standards and looks a certain way. So my motivation to design and fabricate that table and learn how all the little steps that I don't know is to hit this very specific vision in my head. Now, I don't think of that as creativity, which is the second kind of motivation I'm interested in. I think of it as taste, because I literally want to make the thing that looks a certain way. I preconceived what the outcome should be, and I want to have that table in my house or in my portfolio. And taste is a really powerful motivation, but it's closer to consumption than it is to creativity. When it comes to creativity, there isn't as much of an outcome desire. It's more that I would like to make something novel and useful out of the things that I have. And creativity is so much more motivated by its own process, not so much the outcome. Now, people could quibble about these things and talk about the interconnections, but I find it useful to separate these two things. There are times when I want a specific aesthetic outcome, and I will learn everything I need to achieve that outcome. When taste is your motivation, just like when anytime outcome is your motivation, you're setting yourself more up for disappointment and failure. Because if you don't actually achieve what you wanted to in the beginning, it can be a little disappointing. I'm almost never disappointed when creativity is the motivation, because it's just like, I got a free Saturday, I got a tool full of shops, let's get in there and make. When it's just the process itself is rewarding, you can't really get disappointed. Even if the project's an abject failure or a mess, you're like, well, I learned what not to do. So you probably could interweave those two, but I like separating them out. Not that I'm choosing what is motivating me, but it allows me to approach different projects different ways. If I have to do something for a client and they have a very, very specific vision, then it's going to be all about meeting their taste and doing all the learning I can to not disappoint them. But if it comes to me just getting better as a maker in general, removing that disappointment and just being that joyful time spent building stuff with my own two hands, that's the easiest motivation to sustain for the long term. And honestly, if I think I didn't have those two types of motivation, I would have gotten burnt out a long time ago. And I know for sure that if taste and outcomes were my motivation, I wouldn't have been as prolific and I wouldn't have learned as many things. So it's nice to have two different ways to motivate yourself to learn more things. The other thing I think that's important about creativity is it allows you to differentiate yourself more. If you already know the outcome, your ability to differentiate your design or your creative sensibilities versus other people is only going to be on your predictive ability. If you're just exploring free range and constantly learning things, you're going to discover as you go, and you're going to discover new outcomes that you couldn't envision before. If I never got an angle grinder for cutting metal, I would have never considered carving wood with it. And the chances of me thinking about how to do free-form wood, if that was just an outcome I wanted, I probably would have spent all my time researching 5-axis CNCs, which then I would have had to rent time with, and I probably wouldn't have made things like these bar stools because I never would have discovered that just through actually figuring out what I could do with this one very simple, affordable tool. The third aspect of learning is escalation. And this is almost like the non-strategic strategy for learning through just creative experiments. If your goal is to create a product business and you're like, okay, I'm going to design the perfect dining table and then I'm going to sell as many of them as I can. You have to get it all right in that first one, and then you have to figure out how to make it really efficiently, and then maybe every couple of years you do a little tweak or improvement. There'll be creativity involved, there'll be taste involved to kind of set the right look for the table that will both meet your interests and also the purchaser's interests. But I think escalation is a more powerful way to kind of learn. Whereas you just do any one thing right away, and then you say, how do I make that a little bit better or bigger or different, or improve upon the process to make it more efficient? And this is the story that I always use. You've probably heard me talk about this many times, but it's worth repeating. My favorite internet story ever is a story of eBay and Craigslist. And there's this guy, and he took a paperclip and he traded it for a cigarette lighter. Then he traded the cigarette lighter for a stapler, and the stapler for like a hairdryer. And he made a series of escalating trades. And he started with a paperclip and then escalated all his way up through these trades, not actually spending money, just trading for a slightly more valuable thing, to the point where he got a car and then a house, and then he gave away the house. It's a beautiful story. I really like that because he used escalation to expand his abilities, in this case through trades. I think of the same way of when I make things. I made a vase, then I make a three-legged stool, then I make a dining table. And I'm just taking the skills that I learned with one and then escalating the project bigger and bigger. And it took me about 3 to 5 years to go from the vase to the spiral staircase. Then it took me another few years to go from the spiral staircase all the way up to the shipping container house. And then it took me another few years to go from the shipping container house to a 65-room hotel over there at Reset. So escalation, I think, is a really powerful way to learn, because you don't start with a to-do list of all the information you need to absorb and remember. You start with an action imperative, which is, I should get into the workshop, or I should open up my sketchbook and draw something. And then the next day I look at what I drawn before and be like, what could I add? How could I improve? What could I change or amend? Or what can I integrate into this? Or should I just abandon this and move on to something else? So escalation to me is one of the most powerful learning concepts that I've ever kind of considered, because it keeps me busy. And when I'm busy, I tend to be learning, and it makes less of my time being spent on trying to figure out which books to read or which self-help podcast to listen to. It allows me to be action-oriented and then also optimistic that everything I'm learning will get added on or be relatable to some future bigger project if I just keep going. Now, step-by-step instructions are still really valuable. What I like to think, if I was to sort of recommend someone getting into doing what I do, I would start with grouping a series of step-by-step projects into a realm of things that you need. So a great place to start is with plywood. Plywood and the 3 tools that I use the most often: drill, orbital sander, and circular saw, and 3 or 4 sheets of plywood, and make something like a dining table, a desk, some shelves, and maybe a couple other like little storage projects, maybe just really nice crates for storing extra stuff. So with a collection of projects like that, you've made things economically efficient because you're getting a lot of projects out of the same 3 tools. You also get to use the offcuts from one project to start to form the other ones. You may start off with a target of just 3 projects: the desk, the table, the shelves. But you're going to have scrap, and you're going to have better skills than when you started. And so you're going to look at the scraps, and you're going to look at the tools you just used, and you can't predict what you will come up with then, but I guarantee you, you will look at that scrap pile of plywood differently after having done those projects than you would have before. And that's kind of my favorite way to learn, where it's not like you're trying to memorize questions and answers for the test. You just have to take action that I think is pretty fun. You create useful things in the process, and you don't even realize how it's changed your worldview when you look at a scrap pile of plywood. Now, Shane, you've seen me do all this stuff. You've done quite a bit of woodworking and making yourself. Why don't you come in and we'll chat through the nonsense that I just spewed. So how did you first learn woodworking and making in general?
I was in New York. I was a professional dancer for my whole life. And I had a little bit of a break, and I was watching YouTube videos. You were sort of the first person that came up. And I just remember like watching those videos, and it was the first time I was like, I can do that, which I think was the first sort of like believing that you can do something is an enabler of being able to
So it
learn.
was almost like light instructional content with interesting outcomes, where the outcomes are accessible and the instruction doesn't seem overwhelming, was kind of like that. It's funny that actually those early videos, which are pretty much just straight information, I did this, then I did this, then I did that, it created enough sort of a tangible sense where you're like, oh, I could give that a shot. But you hadn't, like, had you used like a circular saw or a jigsaw before that?
I had never really touched a tool.
So maybe like a drill or something?
Yeah, like my dad had, tools growing up, and I maybe like helped him out with something. But yeah, there was this moment where I had like watched enough videos where a couple step-by-steps turned into like a working knowledge. And then once you do it a couple times, that the feel comes in and you're like, oh, I know how from at that point to,
Right.
yeah.
Have you ever taken any like woodworking classes or done a workshop?
No, I've never taken a single class. I think just like pulling from YouTube and being able to combine all of the knowledge that's available and average it out and is enough to get going.
Yeah, it's weird. I think where workshops are really useful is prior to buying tools. Like, I think they actually serve as some of the best tool buying guides. Like, I actually think tool companies should sponsor more workshops, because you could watch the videos, but then still be like, okay, do I get the 5.5-inch circular saw or the 7.25? Actually feeling them in your hands and using them for the first few times, I think makes those purchasing decisions like a lot easier. I took woodworking lessons informally from a family friend, but it was very much like full wood shop, where you make like, little toy wooden cars and dinosaurs. You cut something out in the bandsaw and you put wheels on it and you give it to like the neighbor's kids kind of stuff. And maybe like a side table, not real like full furniture builds. But I did learn how to use a bandsaw under supervision. What's also interesting though is whenever I've learned things in a semi-formal or formal kind of, oh, you're going to this person to learn, I find that I tend to not be as creative following that, because you're like sitting there trying to take notes and remember what this person that has a lot of experience in is telling you. And then like you try to replicate that. So it's much more follow the leader rather than learn a few moves and then extrapolate to your own outcomes. So that's all the other challenge with so many workshops that I see is like, I'll see DIY woodworking workshops all the time. And it's like, they take a 2x12 piece of lumber and they make like a bench with like pocket holes. No shade on it, perfectly good thing. But I'm like, the outcome isn't special enough to justify that cost and instructions. And then you're also got to like stain it all in one day. And then if it's a multiple day thing, that's why I'm really excited about these workshops is, one, they're free. So the only thing you're paying for is your room stay. But I think the rooms are going to be about like $160, $170 a night for the queen rooms. And then if you want a suite, well, then you're doing fancy stuff anyways. But all the materials are free. All the tools are provided. And that way, and with like the concrete stuff, people can make as many of the concrete things as they have time to and take as many as they can carry home with them. I think a lot of people will be driving in from LA, so I think a lot of cars will be driving back heavier when it comes to that.
Totally.
The rock parts are going to be interesting because angle grinders are a little bit more dangerous. You haven't used an angle grinder that much, right?
Enough, but definitely nowhere near.
Right.
Yeah.
Not to the point where you just like pick it up. Like, it's a conscious thought to hold that.
Yes.
That's the other part I think where it's interesting with feel. And the conscious thought where you have to really focus on what you're doing, that's actually really important, especially from a safety standpoint, where I often feel like experts hurt themselves because they get too comfortable. And they're just like, oh, I'm so used to this thing, it's no big deal. And next thing you know, that's how most of my injuries have come with like a box cutter or a knife. Where I'm just like, oh, I'm just cutting stuff, oops. But the angle grinder and the stone part, I think, is going to be intriguing because I can do a lot of demos with it. It's super dusty. So I think we're going to do kind of, and if someone's using an angle grinder for the first time, I kind of have to be right there with them, like almost like a spotter in the gym where, you know, like I can't just like, oh, here's the angle grinder and then, you know, go have a soda and not supervise. The part that I feel like is going to be a lot easier is one of the projects we're going to make with stone is stone vases, like the ones we have at the hotel. And with the hammer drill, I do feel like that's something where a beginner can just do stuff right away. But I think with the demos for the stone cutting and carving, we should have enough time where I can demo how I do it as a full process, get people comfortable making their own first cuts. And then if they, you know, want to pursue this, they'll have like the basics and the familiarity to kind of find some rocks and get a cheap angle grinder and start carving away. But what have you used an angle grinder on?
I made a media console where I took a piece of plywood.
Oh, I know that piece.
Carved into the face.
You carved it so it looks like very topographical. So did you just use like flat discs or did you use like a Arbortech or?
I used a mix between one of like the heavier duty metal blades, and then I switched over to the flap disc to get a little more refined and then sanded from there.
Yeah, the angle grinder with the flap disc, I oddly feel like a little more safe with people for it. And then the third topic is minimalist woodworking. And at first I was gonna be like intro to woodworking, but I think that like is too broad. I think the minimalist woodworking is interesting because you've seen some of those projects that I posted that are for sale. Like recently I posted a Rick Owens table and it was a used one being sold for like $15,000. New, I think they're like $50,000. And it's just like, I don't even think it's a slab. It's just a black tabletop. It's a coffee table with sort of a truncated pyramid base. I think it's even just like edge banded plywood. I don't even think it's like a solid oak thing. And I think that's really interesting because we saw the House of Leon pedestal. I posted that Zara table that was like $1,500. All of those are minimalist woodworking projects. All of those are sold for varying degrees of too much. And all of those are not hard as DIY projects, particularly with the Rick Owens table. And I wouldn't encourage anyone to do a dupe. But if you say, hey, I have similar taste as Rick Owens, like I like these kind of like black wood minimalist things, to get a couple slabs of Douglas fir, make a very simple base, that's actually a pretty beginner level project. And not that people are going to go out and be buying those kind of tables all the time, but can probably make something that meets the same level of fabrication criteria and aesthetic approach for like a few $100s of materials. So I think the minimalist woodworking one will kind of be interesting. And also minimalist stuff tends to be simple. And as long as you don't add that one detail that's actually hard to fabricate, and if you can bring your taste into an arena that matches your fabrication skills, I think people will be pretty happy with it.
This is where I think taste enables learning too. Like I probably would have never wanted to get started had it been like, would you like to make this, get your spoke shave out and make this very traditional thing? Not really. But again, when I saw like your stuff on YouTube, or I would like even browse your Pinterest collection, I was like, oh, if I feel like I can make that and achieve that, taste is what made me like actually go forward with.
Yeah, if my goal was, if I really wanted a house full of Victorian furniture, I probably would have gotten started in a thrifting and antiques career, not a fabrication and woodworking career, right? Like there's a better path to that taste than starting from basic fabrication, learning how to mill all those moldings, and then I would almost start with the history of it and treat it as like a more informational learning base, and then look for opportunities in the resale market, and then really focus on learning how to like sand off old paint and restore things without, it would almost be like a restoration career rather than a fabrication career.
Yeah. Because like hand carving, I don't know that I would have. Here's the other thing, like once you get going, you learn like your preference in tools. Like I feel comfortable with a track saw, whereas like Mike from Modern Builds loves to take the speed square and, you know, sort of like make cuts that way. He's actually pretty good at freehanding it. He's gotten really good at that. He just sort of like, I remember watching videos, I was like, I think I'd be great with a chisel. I'm not that great with a chisel. Yeah. And so getting your hands on teaches you like where your tool preferences are as well.
Yeah, that's where I think the right analogy is like fitness. Like someone will be like, oh, you should do squats, but like squats feel different for other people. Feel is such an interesting concept, and it's why I like to include it in the first part of my sort of explanation of learning. Is, have you ever gone to like the doctor and they give you the pain chart where it's like 1 through 10 or 1 through 5? Here's the thing. That pain, however you rank it, is a concept of feel. No two people's 3 out of 5s or 7 out of 10s in pain are the same. It's a lot is lost in the translation from what they're feeling to that number. I know people that will always be like, yeah, it's a 2, it's a 3. And I know other people, we all know other people, that everything's a 5, everything's a 10, if not an 11, 12, or 100. So with exercise, a squat feels differently to different people. For me, it's no challenge at all to squat all the way down, butt to the ground, because my ankles are flexible and my hips are pretty mobile. For Mike, he can't really get lower before he starts teetering all over. And it's not that he's, Mike's in great shape. It's different movements feel differently to different people. People have different resting postures. So the way they hold something, even if everyone writes, but everyone holds the pen just a little bit different. Everyone has a different signature. And that feel part, you do have to kind of test out which tools work for you. Not to even mention the kind of differences people have up here in their brains. Some people Jessie loves tedious tasks. She loves nothing more than to get geared up, get her beverages sorted, and then just sand for like 8 hours straight. She's got her noise canceling headphones in. She's all decked out in her dovetail workwear, and she just will like go and not get distracted, not do anything else. For me, I don't mind doing that for a couple hours, but then I'll go do a different task and then circulate around. So the brain part of it, I think, is also a big deal in those kind of preferences. I think that's also why some people really get excited about things like fly fishing or woodworking with like hand tools. I think they're also can be very process oriented, but they love the setting and the feel of the scenario that they're in during the process. So they might wear like the nice woodworking apron. They might do the hand-tied flies. They like it almost as a meditative, recreational process unto itself. And for that, I think there's probably a lot of satisfaction in learning, because it's literally just being in the state of the doing things is the reward. And that's why I don't throw shade if people really want to do a little storytelling internally or build up an aesthetic ambiance to that activity. It just means that their goal isn't catching the fish or isn't making the Windsor chair. It's hearing the shavings come off the wood, standing in the stream, getting better and better at the perfect sort of arcing cast. And I think that's a great way to get good at something, because the goal isn't to be good. The goal is to do the thing that will get you good.
There's also a huge difference with like, some people learn better when there's someone there to show them. And there's other people like, you're pressuring me. I would make more progress just figuring this out on my own.
Right, but the being there to show you is not one size fits all. So I think there's a broad category of people that would like an instructor in there. But I think there's, within that group, there's different motivations and reasons why. For some people, it's because they have trouble with like decisiveness or decision making. And they kind of are actually really capable and know what to do. They just want someone to constantly check in. So this is right? Or this is right. This is correct, right? How do I do this? Which glue should I use? So one is a check-in for sort of course correction with just real-time informational needs. That makes them feel safer and more productive. For other people, it's just because they're having a hard time visualizing the beginning instruction level, and they need sort of repeated demonstrations at like smaller and smaller levels to break down some of the intangible steps. Or they might have a low risk tolerance where they're more worried about making a mistake that inhibits their sort of speed of progress, and having an instructor kind of to reassure and to make sure that they aren't making a mistake unlocks them to go a little bit faster. All right, Shane, overrated, underrated, what do we got?
Let's do it. I'm looking at my watch for the list because my phone is a monitor. But let's do workshop aprons.
Workshop aprons, I'm not an apron person. I'm a safety glasses, hearing protection, and dust mask if it's really that. But I'm also not a tool belt kind of person either. Like tool belts to me on a construction site, unless I was like doing framing all day, every day, they hold too much, which inhibits movement, but not enough to where it eliminates me ever going back to the truck. So I've never been an apron or tool belt kind of person. I did design a custom tool belt that was very minimalist. It was kind of based on the design from Star Wars, the original ones, the Han Solo, his holster for his gun, which kind of sits lower on your leg. If I was to do a tool belt, I would go back to that style, and it just holds like tape measure, paper, pens, a couple knives, and it keeps them out of your pockets, which you need for more of your like everyday carry stuff, like your car keys, your wallet, and your phone. But having that on the thigh, I felt was like better for movement, and it keeps you from bumping into things around your hips. So never been an apron person, but I think it makes sense if I do wear protective shirts more and more if I'm doing a lot of angle grinding. Like I really like the heavy canvas or denim poncho shirt I have if I'm doing metal work, because it protects you and it's not too hot. So I guess if I was doing a lot of wood turning, I would probably like an apron to sort of shield all those that impact. And I will say, when I was doing a lot of chainsaw carving for the project at Dataland, the kickback of all those big wood chips, one of them actually went through my pretty heavy denim jeans and stuck into my leg. So it was a good reminder, and that's not why people wear chaps. So I went and got the chaps, the Kevlar chaps, and put those on. So I guess chaps, yes, apron, no.
Reading physical books.
I mean, it sounds good to say underrated and everyone waxes on and on. I don't read that many physical books. I would say like probably 1 out of 5 books I read is physical. Most are either digital, and the most would be audio. It's funny, I actually think reading is up in terms of, I think more people read words than ever before, because they're reading stuff on their phone, they're sending each other text messages. They're actually talking less in terms of like phone calls and in person. So reading in total is up, just the methods of reading are much more short format, small screen, 3-word text messages and stuff like that, and probably less and less paper books.
Yeah.
So I would say paper books, overrated.
Barndominiums.
Barndominiums are overrated by the people that are into them and underrated by everyone else. So a barn dominium, for those that don't know, is a really interesting new housing type that's kind of emerged. Now, these kind of houses have always existed, but as an intentional new build, they're kind of new, where people take an industrial or commercial building approach and they just build a big giant metal building like the kind you would see for a warehouse or a workshop or a contractor's garage. Because you can get a 40 by 60 foot prefabricated steel building enclosure for like $30,000 to $60,000. Now you still have to pour a big slab, you still have to do the infrastructural hookups, and you still have to get someone to erect this big kit of parts. But you can spend a small amount of money relative to get a big enclosed 2,400 square foot building. From there, that allows sort of a DIY approach to sort of do your house and maybe your workshop all inside. So the first barn dominiums that I saw was people that were into trades or makers like us, and they needed a workshop that they could also live in. And so they built cool little lofts inside their workshop, shortens the commute, and a pretty cost-effective way to get a big high ceiling space. What I think is underrated about barn dominiums is that they bring the best of kind of like urban or city dwelling loft life, big modern clean open spaces, a little industrial flair, and they're cost effective. The part that I feel has got a little bit out of control is they've gotten a little too fancy where they start to undercut the efficiency was there. So the more a barn dominium moves away from the barn part and into the minium part, and it starts to become just another way to do a custom house. And then as custom houses, they're not good looking for custom houses. They're effective because they're a blunt industrial object. So I think you can trick something out to the point where it loses its efficiency that brought you to it in the first place. So I think of this as like, don't put a spoiler on your Honda Civic. Honda Civics are phenomenal cars. They're not supposed to be Ferraris. I think they're a better designed car than a Ferrari, precisely because they don't have useless things like spoilers. So barn dominium's great when you keep them stripped down and just the essentials, and they can have a cool look and feel on their own, acknowledging that industrial. The minute you start sort of wood paneling and make them high end, it's kind of just like, it's like a Wagyu hamburger. A good smash burger is just as good, if not better, than every Wagyu burger I have. And you know what? It's not $28. The minute you spend $28 on a hamburger, you should have gotten a steak.
Broad topic, epoxy.
Epoxy is a type of plastic. We're sitting at an epoxy table. I think epoxy is so cool, but it has its drawbacks. It's very toxic. You need a lot of like PPE when you use it. It's really sticky and messy. It's expensive. I think epoxy is phenomenal. You can do really creative stuff with it. In general, I'll say the same thing that everyone else says about epoxy and wood tables. They're beautiful, but we've seen a lot of them. So just because something is common doesn't mean it's not beautiful, right? There's a sunset somewhere every night that's pretty remarkable. There's something worthwhile in appreciating the beauty of common things, but the novelty factor is gone. So I would say epoxy wood tables are not creative anymore. They're not novel. They still can be useful. They still can be good looking. They can still meet some people's taste, but they're not a novel concept at this point. Now, that being said, there's a ton of novel ways to use epoxy that people haven't figured out yet. It might involve combining it with 3D prints. It might be doing more sort of casting. It might be not using it with thick slabs of wood, but I think there's a lot of potential in only using a little bit of wood in the form of veneers and epoxy. So you could make the wood a little bit transparent. You can give the sort of look of wood, but in the flexibility and with the structure of epoxy. Heck, a lot of like the canoes and boats that we've seen are a perfect hybrid of really thin curved wood that's lightweight and epoxy that gives it strength. Also, if you're someone that's into kind of sewing, fiberglass is just epoxy plus cloth. Now, there's no reason why you couldn't mix in canvas or other textiles, mix them into sort of three-dimensional kind of sewing projects, and then create rigidity through epoxy.
Van life.
Van life is really interesting. I think van life is an important cultural thing that has become kind of a vibe or identifiable cliche. So housing is not affordable. There's a big housing affordability challenge. And van life has emerged as sort of a creative way to, you lose some of the comforts of stationary homes and you trade that for the freedom and open air and kind of adventurous feeling of constantly traveling. And you make your home sort of mobile and you get this kind of potentially broad, expansive, nomadic lifestyle. I've known 3 or 4 people that have done this for years. Almost all of them get burnt out eventually. And there's something romantic about it, but there's also something really harsh about it too, and challenging. Not to mention you're sort of cramped and in this sort of confined place. So it's never been something I've been interested in. I've never really even been interested in owning like a motorhome or a Winnebago or anything like that. I'm perfectly fine if I ever wanted to experience that or using one, I would just rent one. But it's overrated for me.
Yeah, I agree. Frank Lloyd Wright.
It's interesting when it comes to sort of historical designers or architectural figures. Their place in history is often more important than their designs are today, right? So Frank Lloyd Wright, undeniably really important architectural figure. There's a lot of things that he did that I like, and a lot of things that he did I think that's like, it's fine. Now, the stuff that I don't really think is that interesting to me as a finished building or a place that I'd want to live in, I haven't seen too many of his homes other than the ones that kind of use the textile blocks that I would actually find desirable to live in, mostly because of the short ceilings and the not so great craftsmanship. I have to remember that I'm looking at them through a modern lens. We have better building technology. We know more about construction. We have better materials and stuff like that. So he was really important. He was not, from everything that I understand, a particularly admirable human being. Like many famous designers, he was very egocentric and kind of an asshole to a lot of people. But he accomplished significant work that's undeniable. So I would say he's properly rated. He's in the history books. He deserves to be there. But do I get a sense of inspiration from his work or from his life story? No.
Have you heard of the enhanced games?
Yeah, the enhanced games are really interesting, right? So the enhanced games the concept was the Olympics and traditional track and field and sports has a lot of rules around using performance enhancing drugs, which creates the curiosity, what is actual human potential if we embrace science, right? So I think there's a reason why Formula One is more interesting than NASCAR, because they let them use more science, more technology with less constraints. So the enhanced games were an idea when I first heard about them that I was really intrigued by. The outcome was not that spectacular. Only like one world record was broken. And some of the performances, even with access to enhancements, didn't really result. So there was 2 kind of debates that I heard emerge from that. One was, well, that just means that everyone in the Olympics and these other ones is already using the performance enhancing drugs, which probably partially, at the very least, that's probably partially true. 2, these performance enhancing drugs don't really work that well. Now, just like peptides or anything else you kind of see out there with supplements, it doesn't mean they don't work at all. It just means that they might be really subtle. And if you look at like the actual studies when they give someone a supplement, it's not like it like increased their running speed by 2x. It maybe improved like their metabolic rate or something by like 10%, right? within this very controlled situation. I kind of think that in analogous to what I do, this is kind of like the difference of different tools. A Festool sander doesn't really speed up my sanding process any more than my Ryobi ones. It costs way more. Now, it has some other advantages. It has great dust collection. It immediately stops when you let go of the trigger. There's some other really nice to haves, but a lot of this times with like supplements, performance enhancing drugs, they have a potential impact if you use them for a long amount of time in a really precise and controlled setting. I'm not either pro supplements or anti supplements. What I am is trying to be realistic on whether or not they would benefit me, even if they did deliver on the claims that they're promising. So I'm not interested in, oh, creatine will improve your sort of ability to retain muscle by this percentage. I mean, that's intriguing because the claims are significant, but not overwhelming. What I'm more interested in is, okay, even if this is something that's beneficial, is it something that I can add to my lifestyle or I'll actually do it, right? And so I'm interested in the high-end capabilities of tools, but I'm more interested in is the tangibility of me actually using them. So we just got a new X-Tool laser engraver, which I'm really excited to get started using. And it has the ability where it can laser engrave on cylindrical objects. So we could laser engrave on these cups, but you have to add an attachment. So it's while I'm intrigued by the ability to engrave cups, be a nice sort of giveaway, way to do sort of custom merch and stuff like that, the part that will ultimately determine whether or not that capability actually makes its way into my habits and lifestyle is how long does it take me to set up that jig. If it takes me hours to set that up and get it calibrated with a couple trial and errors, I probably won't be giving away customized mugs at Christmas. If it's 10 minutes or less and it works flawlessly, I'll probably be giving away a lot of customized mugs at Christmas, right? So that's kind of how I feel about the enhanced games, is that it was underrated as an experiment, even though the outcome was way overrated versus the expectations and promises. All right, what do we got next? That's it?
That's it.
Awesome. So you got topics for overrated, underrated? Put them in the comment section below and we'll add them into the queue next time. So for what I've been working on, it's been a lot of editing. The next video coming out is a DIY project that I'm super proud of. I think this is my most useful DIY project that I've ever done. It's just these very simple shelves. You can make them with very few tools. I think it's one of the most useful aspects of the design for my new house. We didn't have a lot of space in between the island and the wall here. So we couldn't have done a traditional dish cabinet, especially like the ones you see typically as the upper cabinets. It's 10 to 12 inches deep. That would have compromised the amount of sort of walk-through space. So we only needed 5.5 inches of depth to create a whole bunch of storage. Not to mention the speed at which you can get things out, rather than having to come, stand in front, open a cabinet, grab something, close the cabinet, and then move on. You literally can do drive-bys with this, and it's exceptionally useful. So this is exactly where I think instructions are good. This is a project where I feel like I can do step-by-step instructions and people will get it. Now, I made one that's 56 inches square. You can take the same concept and adapt it to any shape or wall area that you have available to you. So, fantastic DIY project. Now, I'm also working on the video follow-up for these carved bar stools. I've actually been getting a lot of inquiries about people buying these, so I'll be making some more. Now, this is the first one that I did, and then I did 2 different variations. I love that they don't match. These are really easy to make, but it would be super difficult to make all 3 of them perfectly identical. For that, I'd probably need a lot of jigs and CNCs. But I think the aesthetic power of them is that they're all a little bit different, like slightly different handmade chess pieces. The third video that I'm working on is an encapsulation of my entire kitchen. And it's how I already posted the video for how I made this kitchen island, but I want to show how we built out to take a normal refrigerator and make it a little more custom and flush fit without spending a lot of money. how I did all of these French cleat shelves, and how I made my kitchen cabinets in a very unusual backsplash. So it will be a video that totally encapsulates this entirely DIY kitchen. So a lot of editing to do, but be sure to follow Homemade Modern and keep your eye out for those videos. Thanks for watching Make a Ranch. Be sure to comment and give us topic and different suggestions. And don't be afraid to give feedback, good or bad. We'd love to hear from you. Bye.